We firstly want to thank Peggy Breeden for opening up this room for us to use, which is a very important part because we never had enough room before for everybody to come. And this is a really special day because we have guests from the state who have come down to speak to us. David Gutierrez came down he came down in October, right, David? And so he's come down now for a repeat performance. And we also now are going to have Eric Ekdahl and Sam, and I don't know Sam's last name. Bolenbrian. I'll introduce you in just a minute. But they're from the state board. So we are really fortunate to have these people here today to talk to you about what's going on with Sigma up in Sacramento. So firstly, let me just go over the fact that this is a GSA eligible agency meeting. It's not a Brown Act meeting. It's not a public meeting per se. But how we're going to work it, if you look at the agenda here, we're going to have the state representatives speak to you. Then we're going to have question and answers that you can direct to them. And after that, we will have the GSA eligible agency representatives, one per agency, come up here, and we will go over what we've been doing for the past 5 months. So that's kind of how we're going to run it. You have an agenda. The agenda, if you pick the agenda up, you will see. Let me remind you, because of the fact that this has kind of got started late and people have come in late, be sure to sign up outside, sign in, make sure we have your email, because that's how we will communicate with you all, and pick up any of the handouts out there. So just make sure you have your name on the list before you leave today if you want to receive any of the handouts. Let me just go over the ground rules, and then I'll have everybody introduce themselves. Well, let me have you introduce yourselves first. Firstly, let me introduce the people from the state. We've got Eric Ekdahl, and we have Sam. Say your name one more time. Bolenbrian. Okay, Sam Bolenbrian and Eric Ekdahl. And Eric is the Director of Research Planning and Performance of the State Board. And then we have David Gutierrez from DWR, Department of Water Resources. And David is the executive sponsor of SGMA, the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act. Okay, so those are our guests. Now, I would like the people on the act, the representatives of the Groundwater Sustainable Agency that we're putting together, our GSA, I would like them to introduce themselves. So let me, and the attorneys too. So let me just start right over here with Bob.
I'm Bob Harrington. I'm the water director for Inyo County.
Go ahead and pass it.
And I'm Matt Kingsley, the 5th District Supervisor from Inyo County. And if I don't look quite as good as some of these other guys. It's because I've been out in the 5th District in Death Valley, and it was pretty windy there today, and I'm feeling kind of gritty.
Mick Gleason, Kern County.
Robert Lovingood, 1st District, San Bernardino County.
Yeah, I'm Bob Page with the Administrative Office for San Bernardino County.
The attorneys can introduce themselves.
Good evening, folks. I'm Keith Lemieux. I'm the City Attorney for Ridgecrest.
I'm Peter Brown, Indian Wells Valley Water District.
Peggy Breeden, Mayor, Ridgecrest.
Chuck Griffin, Indian Wells Valley Water District.
Jim Worth, Attorney for Indian Wells Valley Water District.
Don Sadiba, General Manager, Indian Wells Valley Water District.
Alan Christensen, Chief Deputy CAO for the county.
Robert Pavelik, BLM.
Oh, cool. Hey, good to see you, Robert. Okay, what did the Navy do? They all backed up. They're all in the back. Because the Navy is one of our associate members, and here they are way back here, so I have to walk. Okay, so why don't you just go across, because I know.
Captain Rich Wiley, Commanding Officer, China Lake.
And Commander Jared Markley, I'm the Region Environmental Counsel for Navy Region Southwest.
Good afternoon. I'm John O'Gara, Environmental Director for NAWS.
Mike Stoner, I'm a geologist for NAWS.
Hello, I'm Tim Fox. I'm the Knowledge Community Plans Liaison Officer.
Tim? I get my exercise this way.
Yeah, you're getting your exercise. I'm Tim Parker. I'm a groundwater management consultant and consultant on this GSA formation to Kern County and the group.
And I'm Dale Schaefer, and I'm actually with DWR and as your facilitator. All right, let me just go over a few ground rules, and then we'll just get right into it. So I know you really can't read them very well in the back, but they're the same things that we go over every time. It's basically, you know, one person speaking at a time. And when we get into the question and answer sessions, if many of you have your hands up, I'll have you form a queue. And then you'll have to remember what number you are in the queue, and then I will let you ask your question. So we'll do it that way. Limit side, I wrote conservation. You don't want to limit conservation. You want to limit conversation. So limit side conversations during the presentations, which you always do, and be, you know, just common courtesy. Basically, just treat each other, you know, with common courtesy, and others when they speak, even if you don't agree with them. Focus, this is an important one. Focus questions and comments on the topic under discussion. This is not like a public hearing where you go off, you know, and talk about other things. We're so fortunate to have the state representatives here that we really want to be on target with questions for them concerning SGMA that they can answer while they're here in person. So please try to stay focused, and you will have time to talk to them and ask questions. Honor time. That's a really big one too, and that's kind of my job. If you get way off, I'm going to have to limit you, but I know you won't, because I've seen many of you here before, and you've done a great job. And turn off cell phones, which I'm the first one that made a mistake last time. My cell phone rang. So please turn off your cell phones or mute them, or however you want to quiet them down. Okay. So with that, let's, who's going to go first? David, you're going to, okay. So this is David Gutierrez from Department of Water Resources, and he will begin. Do we, no, okay, you can go right ahead.
Okay. I was here in October, and I kind of gave everyone an overview of what the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act is all about. And I won't repeat it completely, but in case there's new members in the audience today, I thought maybe I should kind of go over at least half of it and get everybody up to speed with some pretty important and critical terms to understand what the Act's all about. Then after that, I'll talk just a little bit. We've also covered this in October, the actual basin itself and the Indian Wells Basin and how it's designated a critically overdrafted basin and why. And then finally, really what I'm here today to do is to kind of catch you up. What have we done over the last year? And then what's in the future. And then my colleagues will talk a little bit about the control board and their roles as well. So first of all, if you all remember, we talked about adverse impacts, and adverse impacts being across the state, not necessarily just here. But we know that groundwater throughout the state of California and the take of groundwater can cause significant impacts and has caused significant impacts throughout the state. And here's just a few of the examples. So if we take too much groundwater out of the coastal areas, seawater begins to intrude. We've got plenty of case histories of that. If we take too much groundwater in areas, there is potential for subsidence. We have plenty of case histories where, in fact, the land, subsidence means the land's actually dropping. We have plenty of case histories where the land has dropped 30 or more feet over the last several decades. And we have actually examples where the ground's actually dropping a foot a year in particular areas. Well, you can imagine what that's going to do to the infrastructure, the rivers, the levees, et cetera. We also have case histories where we take too much groundwater away from areas next to a river. It's going to have significant impact to that river. And in fact, we have case histories where it actually has dried up the river. And then, of course, we have case histories where we take too much groundwater and the actual level of the water just drops. And that, of course, and we have case histories where that's dried out our neighbors' wells. And we have plenty of case histories where folks this year and last year didn't actually have water in their wells, and therefore the state had to actually provide them water. And so these impacts are the reason for the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act. We've been living with this for several decades, and in some areas we haven't really addressed it, and that's the reason for the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act. Now, I'm only going to talk about groundwater. But we got to realize that groundwater and surface water are completely tied together. And generally, in most parts of the state, you're not going to solve the groundwater problem without dealing with the surface water issues. And so the California Water Action Plan kind of lays out a future of how we're going to have to deal with water management and water resources in the future. And SGMA's a major component of that. And it really all comes down to water balance. You got supply and you got demand. That equation's fairly simple. If your supply equals your demand, you're in pretty good shape. If you're taking too much demand and not replenishing it with supply, well, then you're out of balance. And that's what we're going to try to avoid, I think, in the future. And that's what SGMA's trying to deal with. So the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, it was passed in September of 2014. And we kind of like to think of it in three different areas. The first is the framework. So the framework is actually the act itself. The act itself actually gives us some pretty good direction and is fairly specific on some of the things the state's roles and responsibilities are going to be. It also talks about the local roles. So the local roles, and we're going to cover this, but the locals have certain roles that they're going to have to achieve in order to become sustainable. And then there's the state roles, and we're going to talk a little bit about that. And there's really two big state players in this particular component, and that's my department, the Department of Water Resources, and my colleagues' departments, the State Water Resource Control Board, and we'll cover some of those. So first of all, let's start talking about some important terms, make sure we understand what they are. So the first one is, you're going to see this term GSA. It's called the Groundwater Sustainability Agency, and that's a new term as a result of the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, which we're referring to as SGMA for short. Now, this is the local agency of the future. And so what we have is, when we look at and we're going to talk about what a basin is, but when we look at basins throughout the state, what we need to do is we need to manage those particular basins. And sometimes within these basins, there's various water agencies, or there's various land use agencies, and it's going to be a collection of these agencies that are going to have to manage groundwater in the future. And it's going to be up to these local agencies to figure out their governance structure, but that's what's going to be called the Groundwater Sustainability Agency. And those groundwater sustainability agencies have to form by June 30th of 2017. Another critical term is called the Groundwater Sustainability Plan. And so once a groundwater sustainability agency is developed, once that governance structure is on its way, then that group is going to have to come together and develop a plan for the future of that basin. And in simple terms, it's a plan to get that basin in balance, or in some cases, the basin's already in balance, it's already sustainable. It's a plan to continue that basin into the future, into the balance. So that groundwater sustainability plan has to be completed by January of 2020 if it's a critically overdrafted basin, and January of 2022 for all the rest of the basins that are high and medium priority. And we'll talk a little bit about what both those terms mean. And then the planning horizon. So it took us decades and decades, and in some cases 100 years, to get to the situation that we're in today. We're not going to get out of it overnight. And so SGMA recognizes that, and so this plan that we're talking about, the Groundwater Sustainability Plan, should be over a 20-year planning horizon. So basically what that means is we have to start solving the problem today, but it doesn't have to be able to turn on a dime. It's going to take us a while to get to that balanced situation, and we're going to need to be there within a 20-year period. Okay, so let's a couple of basics here. Let's make sure we're all on the same page of what this means. So basin and subbasin. So first of all, what is actually a groundwater basin? What I like to talk about a groundwater basin in simple terms, think of a bowl. And think of, over the years, this bowl got filled up with sediments and sands and gravels, and now there's water in there over millions of years. And so with what we're talking about, a basin, that's what we're talking about. We're talking about this bowl, and we're basically talking about the water within that bowl. That's the groundwater. Now, we designate both basins and subbasins when we originally put some of the language together back early in the 1950s of defining some of these basins statewide. Now, the only difference between a subbasin and a basin is a basin's really that bowl that I talked about, but in some situations, the basin's so large that it can't really be managed at that extent. So I like to give the example of the Central Valley of California. The Central Valley of California is one big, gigantic, huge basin, and that was subdivided over the years into various jurisdictions for various reasons, and so we call that a subbasin. So basically what that means is the water's within all that basin, and when it gets to that line, when it gets to that jurisdictional point, the water doesn't necessarily stop. It kind of continues right through that sub-basin. And so they're completely tied together and related. But from a respect in terms of governing such a situation, the basin's subdivided into these sub-basins. Now, when we talk about sigma, there's really no difference. Basins, sub-basins, you can think of them the same. Basically, it's a governance structure to actually be able to govern and manage that groundwater in the future. And so there's 515 groundwater basins and sub-basins throughout the state. And so those are the ones that are applicable to sigma. However, there's also what's called a basin prioritization. And what sigma really does is it's trying to focus on the most important basins throughout the state. And so out of those 515 basins, there's 127 basins that are designated as high and medium priority basins. Now, the difference with sigma is that high and medium priority basins are actually required by law to actually follow sigma. Whereas if it's a low and very low priority basin, it's up to the local community to make a decision of whether or not they want to follow the law and take advantage of the authorities to manage that particular basin. Now, there does seem to be some confusion on basin prioritization and high and medium priority basins. Some folks think, you know, if we can show you that our basin's in good shape, can't we just drop from a medium to a low or a very low priority basin? That's not how it works. The better way to think of it is the groundwater important to your community? If it's important to your community, it's a medium or high priority basin. So really, when you look at the criteria for what makes a high and medium priority basin, it's really the population within the basin and the dependency on groundwater within that basin. So if your community depends on the groundwater and you have a significant population, that's why you're a medium or high priority basin, not the condition of the basin. So there is some confusion with that, and some folks think that if we can show you that our groundwater is actually in pretty good shape, we can drop it. That's really not going to do anything at all, really. It's really an importance factor that's more important. As far as I could remember, I can't remember when you weren't. So I'd have to give you the number, but it's way back years ago, probably decades ago, that you were designated medium priority basin. But I could get you the exact date. I don't know that off the top of my head, though. Okay, a couple other very important terms in the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, and that's what's called undesirable results, significant and unreasonable. And so in the beginning of the presentation, I talked about those impacts, and that's generic. Those are the impacts that are actually causing some problems throughout the state. Well, when you look at groundwater sustainability and this new term called undesirable results, that's actually defined in sigma. And it's absolutely a critical term to understand. And so when you look at undesirable results, you know what? Those are those same exact impacts that I previously talked about. So an undesirable result is a lowering of a groundwater level, a reduction of groundwater storage, a seawater intrusion, water quality degradation, land subsidence, and depletion of surface water. Now, the reason why this is so important is this is what the sigma revolves completely around. This is what we're going to try to avoid in the future. We need to avoid these things from happening at a significant and unreasonable way. And so everything that our regulations and everything are going to follow this very important term of undesirable results. If we could avoid undesirable results from occurring, then we're going to be in good shape. If you can get your situation in a balanced condition, you're probably not going to have these undesirable results. And that's what we're driving to. So this is a really important term to understand, and you're going to see this over and over again. And this is how the groundwater sustainability plans are going to be developed. They're going to be developed in a way to avoid this in the future. Okay, key principle. This is a very important principle. The top one is really critical. It's the way the legislation's laid out. The Department of Water Resources certainly buys into this key principle, and we're doing everything we can to follow that. And that is, we believe that groundwater is best managed at the local and regional level. And my colleagues are going to talk to you about if the locals don't come in through and actually manage groundwater successfully, they'll do that for you. But that's not really probably the best approach. We believe the best approach is for you all. You know the situation better. You should manage your groundwater. You can come up with the approaches that you think are the way to best do it. So this is a key principle, and it's how the Department of Water Resources developed its regulations, and it's how we're going to implement this particular program. And so now let's shift gears just a little bit, and I'll start with talking a little bit about the department's roles. And we talked about this last time in October, so this is a bit of a repeat, but I look at it in pretty much two buckets. The department's roles are first to develop the rules of the game. And then after that, it's all about assistance. So the rules of the game are two key regulations that I'll talk about later. First one is basin boundaries and the adjustment of basin boundaries and the regulations and the rules that go around adjusting basin boundaries. So we'll cover that a little bit later. And then the next very important one is the groundwater sustainability plan regulations. And what that is what's in the regulation, what's in the groundwater sustainability plan, and how are we going to evaluate that plan in the future. And so the department has finished the first set of regulation. That one's complete. That one's behind us. And we're right in the middle and actually towards the end of developing the regulations for the groundwater sustainability plan. In fact, the comment period is over. We sent out our draft several months ago. Comment period is over. Now what we're doing is we're revising our initial draft to consider those comments, and we're going to be coming out with a final regulation. We're going to try to get that adopted by the Water Commission in May so that we can get that completely adopted by June, so you groundwater sustainability agencies actually know the rules of the game and can start putting your management structure together. And then after that, it's assistance. So we're here to provide technical assistance. I'm going to give you some examples of what we're doing. Planning assistance, financial assistance. We've already started with some financial assistance. There's more to come. And then interregional assistance. So in some cases, problems can't be solved within an area itself, and it's going to need some interregional assistance. And I think the Department of Water Resources is going to try to figure out how we can assist those GSAs in the future. And then my colleagues are really going to cover this. So this is the backstop to Sigma. So as I mentioned prior, is if the local agencies either decide or are not able to put a groundwater sustainability agency or an effective groundwater sustainability plan together by certain dates, then the State Control Board will come in and they will manage the basin for you. And my colleagues will talk to you today of what that's going to look like. Okay, so now let's shift gears a little bit. Again, we've already covered this. Tim Ross, our geologist, actually covered this last time he was here. And I won't go into too much details, but I kind of look at the Indian Wells Basin as kind of a no-brainer. And what I mean by that is it or is it not in a critical condition of overdraft? In my mind, this one's pretty obvious. When you look at the hydrographs, there's really no question about it. There's technical reports, and you could always read technical reports in different ways. But when you get to the bottom line and you start looking at the water levels, not just over the last year, but over the last decades, you see a tremendous drop in the water level. And as a result of that, right there, game over, it's obviously in critical condition of overdraft. It's obviously not in balance. So we've got plenty of wells that show this. In fact, almost all the wells do. There's a few wells that don't show it, but most of the wells in the basin show chronic decline, and it's something we obviously have to address, and we need to get on this one right away, which is why this is considered a critical condition of overdrafted basin. We designated nearly 24 basins throughout the state in critical condition of overdraft. We did that through draft in July. We worked with basin managers first to give us them an opportunity to bring other information to the table to show us whether we had this correct or not. We also went out publicly with public comment period to allow others to comment on this, and then we finalized the list. And in fact, as expected, Indian Wells really didn't change based on our draft. It's, again, pretty obvious. So this basin is in critical condition of overdraft. And then what does that mean? Really, there's really only one meaning to that. And the only one meaning is you have to have the groundwater sustainability plan done by 2020 instead of 2022. So that's really the only meaning. There is a positive to that, though. One example would be we recently gave out some funding to certain areas, and the areas that are in critical condition of overdraft, we're actually trying to shovel some funding that way a little bit faster. So they were able to get some funding as a result of that. And finally, this, I guess this is the conclusion of that, and these are all the reasons. We have all this information on our website. We have all the references available there. This basin is actually very well studied, so there's a lot of studies on this, a lot of information on this, and we have all that documented and on our website if anyone's interested to go and dive into the details of exactly why we came up with the conclusions that we came up with. Okay, now let's switch gears again. So now this is the third part of my presentation, and now we're going to talk about what have we been doing over the last year. So this is what we've been doing since the last time I was here, and I'd invite you to look at a couple of things. One is our strategic plan. So the strategic plan was put out in draft form. It was actually put out last March in draft form. It's still available, and it's still accurate, and it was considered draft because we had always had an intention to make this finalized. Once we get the program up and running, we're going to know a lot more than what we did back in March. And so we still do have plans to probably finish that in the next several months to finalize that strategic plan, make it a little bit more precise, and give a little bit more direction on exactly what the department's going to do about Sustainable Groundwater Management Act. I'd also invite you to our website. Our website is an extremely robust website. It has an enormous amount of information on it. We are trying our hardest to be absolutely as transparent as we possibly could, and therefore I'd invite you to look at our website. Everything we know is on this website. We also have some tools for folks. We have interactive tools. You can pop up a map. You could look at your basin. You could actually see the different agencies, where the different county lines are, whether you're in or out in terms of priority, etc. We have other maps up there as groundwater sustainability agencies are forming. You could actually see it on a live map as they form. It goes live on the map, and you could see what GSAs are coming forward statewide and how the state is moving along with the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act. So again, I'd invite you to this website. There's actually 3 websites. We're partners with our colleagues, the State Water Resource Control Board. So there's an overall governor's website, and then that feeds into the State Water Resource Control Board and the Department of Water Resources websites. Best way to get there is actually Google it. Just Google California groundwater. That's the easiest, but I will give you some addresses at the end. Okay, here's a couple of the things now that I'm going to kind of cover of what we've been doing over the last year. And we're going to take some of these one by one. This actually isn't everything, but it's the big ones. It's the important ones. And I'm going to try to describe where we are and what we've done. So the first one was, of course, that basin subject to critical condition of overdraft. And this one I actually already covered. So again, we drafted, we first put out the draft. This was based on information that we had available. Again, it was really the basins that are in serious trouble. The data and the information's pretty much there on most of these basins, or actually all of these basins. Again, I don't think there in fact were very little to no arguments on any of these basins considered critical condition of overdraft. We took not only comments from the agencies, we took the public comments by September 2015, and a result of those comments, or I would say the lack of the comments, we completed this, and so this is done. This is where we are, and that's not going to change at all. And in fact, there's really no reason for it to change, because now the basins are designated. They have to be done by 2020 or 2022. So there's really no reason to revisit this in the future. Basin boundary regulations. So this was an important one. So this is more important for some of the jurisdictional basins, but it could have some implications on basins such as the Indian Wells here. And that is, think of the fact that when we developed these boundaries around the basins, they were developed in the 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s. And in some cases, the information is not quite either accurate or up to date. And so from a scientific point of view, the locals may have better information for us to actually modify the basin boundaries. And if they do, we set up a regulation and rules of what they need to do in order to convince the Department of Water Resources and how we would evaluate those basin boundary adjustments. So this regulation was completed last year. We actually drafted the regulation and posted them in July. We had public comments. We had hundreds of meetings on this subject, and we actually completed this regulation in advance of the deadline. We actually completed it in November of 2015. And the reason we had to do that is we actually had to beat the timeline because these folks had to go out there in advance. The GSAs need to figure out how they're going to govern their structures. And in order to do that, they need to know where their boundaries are going to be. Now, I talked about scientific boundaries, but there's also jurisdictional boundaries. And maybe this doesn't apply really too much here, but when I talked about the entire Central Valley being one big basin and it's broken up from jurisdictions, in some cases there may be a better way to manage a particular basin from a governance structure. And therefore, we had to put a regulation together to give some latitude for that. Again, the basin is best managed at the local level, so we need to provide tools for them to do that. And so this regulation kind of outlines all of that. It's completed. This one's also behind us. And in fact, a window of opportunity was open between January and the end of March to make some basin boundary modifications. Some did come forward. The window's closed for now, but there will be a future window opening in 2017 and every 5 years after that, so that basin boundary could continually be modified and updated as necessary. Okay, basin prioritization. So we're going to look at this again, but the biggest reason we're going to look at this is there's an additional component, and that is the SGMA required the Department of Water Resources to consider adverse impacts on local habitat and local stream flow. So in the past, this was not considered. And so this is an added feature that's going to possibly, I don't see it changing too many of the medium and high priority basins, but it's probably going to capture some of the low or very low and actually push them into the medium and high priority category because it's important to local habitat and local stream flow. So we're right in the middle of that. That's going to be due probably at the end of this year. We actually plan to actually reprioritize the basins. I expect a few to be added to the low and medium priority category, and then that will be used to actually continue implementation of SGMA. Okay, now the big one. The big one is the Groundwater Sustainability Plan regulations. And so this one completely follows those same things, the undesirable results and what's significant and unreasonable. And so what we've laid out is we've laid out a fairly detailed process that the GSAs are going to have to follow in order to show us that, in fact, they're going to be sustainable. Now, on the same token, we have a detailed process. We have to understand that we need it also to provide flexibility. And the reason we need to provide flexibility is, remember, a basin in Southern California from a geologic or geographic condition is completely different than a basin in Northern California. And you also have different governing structures, etc. So we have to figure out a way to, one, be able to grade the plan to make sure that, in fact, it could show us that we're sustainable. But on the same token, it has to be flexible enough in order to allow the local groundwater sustainability agencies to come up and fit their needs. And so we finished that draft. Like I said, we've completed that. The comment period is actually already closed. We received about 200 comments throughout the state, which really isn't a lot, but when we add those 200 comments, that's 200 individuals actually commenting. We added about 2,000 separate little comments, wordsmithing and everything else. So as you can imagine, we're pretty busy trying to actually digest those comments, try to sift through ones, and try to figure out which of those comments actually really make sense and are good reasons why we should, in fact, change the regulations. And in fact, you will see some changes in the regulations as a result with some very good comments that we received. So you're going to see that coming out probably in the first or second week of May as a final draft, and then it'll be hopefully adopted at the end of May, and off we go, and the groundwater sustainability agencies will be able to abide by those rules. GSA formation is another very important issue. Like I said, you can go to our website and actually see GSAs being formed. In some areas it's going well, in other areas it's not going quite as well. And so you could see in our map where we have what's called overlapping jurisdictions. And so when you see areas in the dark blue on this one, and this isn't the most updated map, I could show you some others, that's not a good sign, because that means two local agencies are claiming the same area, but they forgot to talk to each other and didn't necessarily coordinate. So what the state of California is going to say is, well, go back to the drawing board. We are not going to call you an exclusive agency. You have to work it out. You have to actually have some kind of agreement in place before you come to us to develop a groundwater sustainability agency. And the reason we say this is we've been saying this for the last year or so, and that is coordination is absolutely critical. So if you can't coordinate your governance structure, you're in trouble, because from here on out, you're going to have to coordinate everything else. And everything we've written up to now, the regulations and everything we're driving towards, is going to require coordination. Folks are going to have to work together whether they like it or not. Otherwise, it'll be up to the board to figure out how they're going to coordinate. And again, my colleagues will talk a little bit about that. Facilitation support. So this was actually a result of some of those dark blue areas we were seeing. So we were seeing some agencies not necessarily working well together, which again, our interest is for the locals to manage groundwater. We, the Department of Water Resources, do not want the control board to come in and take over. I think that's probably a bad way to go. But if it was me, I'd rather manage my own area. So we saw that coming, and that wasn't working out too well. So what the Department of Water Resources did is we shifted some of our funding. We hired facilitators like the one we have here today, and they're not department employees, they're private facilitators, but it was our way to offer local agencies a chance to take advantage of facilitation, and it was our way to say, please get together and start talking this out so you could actually govern yourself. And so we're extending that program next year. So far, so good. It's actually working well. And so we think we see some early successes, so we're going to kind of extend that into the future and to help those agencies figure out governing structure and move forward. And then areas that I won't talk too much about, but the department is going to be coming through with some best management practices. And so by the end of this year, we'll have a document, best management practices. This is to help the local agencies to figure out the best way forward. How should they develop their governing structure? How should they develop a groundwater sustainability plan? What should be in there, what shouldn't be, et cetera, et cetera. And so we're working on that right now, and we will complete that by the end of this year and make it available. Bulletin 118, we're going to be updating that also by 2017. And the purpose of updating that is really to document everything I've already told you before. So things like the critical condition of overdraft, any changes in basin boundary. This is the official document that updates that, and so we'll be completing that. We've already provided up to $10 million to counties, and I believe your area here received $250,000, which is quite significant, to get the counties in the game. It's really important for a groundwater sustainability agency, for a county or the local land use planners to be involved, because we're trying to tie land use with water use. You can't do them separate. You have to understand your land use in order to be successful on your water use. And so this was to incentivize the counties from participating in the Groundwater Sustainability Agency, not necessarily being a groundwater sustainability agency, but be part of the equation, because it's going to be really critical for them to work together. Another document that we're putting together probably by the end of this year is a document called Water Available for Recharge. So this is going to be a very high-level document, and it's going to be broken up into two pieces. Piece number one is what water is actually available out there already. In other words, what water is not being used? Where is that water? So we're gonna document where that water is at a very high level. But that could be very misleading. And the reason I say it could be very misleading is it doesn't come unless you actually build infrastructure to capture that water. And so we have plenty of water in the state, but at a cost. And so that's what's going to be the second part, and that is, how do you capture that water? And so we're going to put together a program to outline and give some guidance of how you would capture that water. And again, it's really important to understand that even though water is available, it may not be economically possible to capture that water. And so we got to keep an eye on both things. Data is absolutely critical. So the lack of data creates more and more arguments. And so what we need to do is we need to close the gap. And in fact, our regulations actually drives to that too. The regulations are actually going to require the groundwater sustainability agencies to identify data gaps and begin to close those data gaps. And the state needs to do their part as well. And so what we're putting together is a program to provide information to the locals, for the locals to be able to use, so that there's consistent data and also data that can be collected on a much more efficient manner. So it's much more efficient in some cases for the state to pay for and collect data versus each and every local agency, those 515 possible basins, to individually collect the data. And so we're putting that together as well. The next two are fairly minor, so I'll skip those in the interest of time. And then success factors. So I put some success factors up here. So what this means is what are the areas we have to pay attention to? If we don't get this right, this is the ones that are going to fail us. And I put GSA formation up at the top. And that's because this is the one that's due right now. You guys got to get your act together. You have to figure out how to govern your structure. And so we really want to make sure we're doing our part to help you do it. We can't do it for you, but we can provide you what we can in terms of tools and financial assistance to do that, and we're going to continue to do that. But it's absolutely an important factor, because by June of 2017, which is just a little bit over a year from now, you have to have that GSA formed. Otherwise, you flunk the first pass, and we refer you directly to the board. Some of the other success factors are data gaps, fact or fiction. I like to bring that up, and the departments and the control board are going to do a little bit more about that. We've been pretty busy with creating regulations, so we really haven't had as much time to do that. So although we've sent out facilitators, we'd like to come around to the different basins and be present, to be actually there to answer questions. Because sometimes what happens is folks start creating fiction around things, and we'd like to be there to make sure that folks understand what the actual truths are in terms of SGMA and the direction the state's taking versus inventing those truths. Support and assistance, we certainly need to fund this from a state level, and so we're doing everything we can to do that. And then the last button is really a critical one for the local agencies, and that it's all a matter of balancing supply and demand, and there are some tough decisions. So let's not pretend that there aren't. There's some tough decisions that you all are going to have to make, but it's you that should make them, not the state. But the state will make them for you if not. So you should realize that up in front, and you should start attacking that problem right away. So that's our message on that one. So with that, again, I refer you to our website. There's a lot of information there. We're going to come down here when necessary to help you along, but really the ball's in your court. It's up to you to succeed. And we're here to provide you assistance where we can. And so with that, I'll close it. And whether you want to do questions now or later, it's up
I think
to you.
we'll let Eric and Sam do their presentation, and then we'll open it up to questions from the audience to the state visitors, if that works with everybody. But before I do that, I left two people off because they got farther back and farther back that are with our group from the county.
Phil Hall, Deputy County Counsel, County Kern.
Leanne Cook, Chief of Staff, District 1, Supervisor Gleason.
Thank you. I'm sorry to have missed you. And I think if anyone had, I think someone walked in. Sir, you're with San Bernardino? Yeah. And I think that maybe we'd like to hear who you
My name is Ron Freeman. I'm a district representative for the 1st District Supervisor, Robert Lovingood, San Bernardino.
Thank you. Anyone else that can't come in that I didn't catch? Okay. Eric, where'd you go?
Right here.
Okay. So, Eric, you get to go ahead, start. And
I'm just going to briefly talk. My name is Eric Ekdahl. I'm the director for the Office of Research, Planning, and Performance at the State Water Resources Control Board. I wanted to give just a really brief introduction to my staff person who's actually going to give the main presentation and talk really quickly about why the State Board is here and what our general role is, and then Sam will get much more specific and kind of give you the gory details. As David mentioned, if you look at Sigma...
You know, Eric, they can't really hear you real well back here.
Is this better?
You're tall, that's why.
Okay. I kind of kneel and
Have
look a
to
little
kneel.
informal.
Okay.
If you look at Sigma, the kind of permeating theme of Sigma is that groundwater management is best accomplished at the local level. That was in a signing statement that the governor wrote when he signed Sigma into law. And if you look at Sigma, Sigma is structured to give locals the best possible chance and ability to manage their own resource. But Sigma also recognizes that there may be circumstances where local efforts just aren't successful, whether it's because of just lack of cooperation or lack of funding or lack of resources. There may be many reasons why locals don't choose to manage their own groundwater resources. And groundwater is too important of a resource to just let it fall away to the wayside. And so Sigma writes in a role for the State Water Resources Control Board as the state backstop. So while the Department of Water Resources is framing the conversation about what has to go into sustainability plans and providing the technical components and the technical assistance necessary for locals to achieve sustainability, the State Water Board is essentially this backstop agency or this enforcement agency that's basically written in to come in if local efforts aren't successful. So within the State Water Board itself, in the Office of Research Planning and Performance, we were granted 9 new positions specifically for Sigma and Sigma implementation. That's part of the groundwater management unit in the Office of Research Planning and Performance. And Sam Bolin-Bryan, who's about to speak, is the acting program manager for that groundwater management unit. And with that, I'll let Sam speak then about what specifically State Board intervention might look like, what the details are, and then we'll be available to answer any questions afterwards.
Thanks, Eric. Could we get the slides up? So I'm Sam Bolin-Bryan with the State Water Board, acting program manager for the groundwater management unit. As Eric mentioned, we were just given a bunch of new staff to kind of step in and manage the basin where necessary. And I'm going to run through kind of what that process looks like and kind of get into some of the details of what Sigma allows us to do, and then when we're allowed to step in and what may happen. But first, I kind of wanted to set the stage and tee off what Eric and Dave talked about. And it's this distinction between the different roles that the different agencies have. And so there's kind of 3 main players, as Dave said. There's the Department of Water Resources, there's the State Board, and then there's the local agencies, or GSAs. And Sigma is very specific in kind of who is expected to do what. And as Dave kind of summarized, they have a tremendous number of tasks building up this framework in the beginning stages, this first couple of years. And they've done a great job kind of on this long list of tasks to build the regulations and kind of the expectations of what the local agencies will have to do. But really the heavy lift in the next few years is on the local agencies as to implement this framework that the department has built. The board is given a separate role, so we're apart from the Department of Water Resources. The State Board is kind of meant to motivate local agencies, and where local agencies fail in their efforts to work within that framework that the department built, we're given the authority to step in. And so that's where this process of the backstop, or the idea of us backstopping local failure comes about. And so diving into our specific role, you can kind of break it into 2 separate parts. It's called the state backstop, but really the first part is data manager. So we're going to be collecting the data necessary to manage the basin. And it's really the first key step in moving forward in sustainable management is making sure that you have the data you need. And so we'll start collecting pumping reports. We'll store that data. And then we'll use it to become a basin manager if needed, if we keep progressing through the steps of state intervention or the backstop. And so that second role we take on is kind of a second phase. And that's where you can think of us as this interim basin manager, where we will manage the basin on behalf of local agencies until they're able to step up. And so this is where we'll be implementing what's called an interim plan. And SGMA has given this the state board this new authority where we can directly intervene and then manage the groundwater resources of the basin until local agencies are ready to take control back. It's also worth pointing out in kind of some general principles that we're just temporary and we're just there as a backstop until locals can address the issues they were having. Also an important point is that we're coordinating a lot with the Department of Water Resources. So with those three circles, there's that kind of center point where we all agree that this is best done at the local level, but there is a little overlap between the department and the board, and that we're coordinating on certain key features, like we're making sure that we're not duplicating efforts, and then we're using the same data, and then we're kind of giving the same messaging and outreach as we work on implementation. And so kind of the basic premise, and important to note, is we can't step in unilaterally. We don't have this undefined authority to step in when we want. We very specifically can only step in under SGMA when there's failure at the local level. And SGMA's pretty specific about that. And so it gives local agencies their fair chance, essentially. And so we're not going to be arbitrary, and we're going to wait until it's clear that it's needed, that we need to step in. Also important to note that when we do start intervening in a basin, there will be opportunities to correct the problems that led to us getting involved. And we'll clearly state how to correct those problems, identify what the problems were, and then there will be chances to fix those problems. So we're not kind of just steamrolling forward once we start. We want to make sure that it's fair and that we can get out of the basin if we're not needed anymore. We're only there to just solve the problem, and if local agencies solve it, we're not needed there anymore. And I don't know if you can see that behind the chairs, but there's kind of three main steps in state intervention. One is you trigger it, so one of these failures that is well defined in the statute. And then next, we'll move the basin towards what's called a probationary basin. So we'll make a probationary designation. We'll hold a hearing at the board where everyone can kind of provide their 2 cents on whether we should move forward. But really, that main step is probation. And then that's kind of like this middle step to kind of give the local agencies one last chance to clean things up. And if that doesn't happen, then we move to the final step, which is an interim plan. And so it's worth keeping it into those three categories or phases of state intervention. And so these are these triggers. That first step, Dave had the similar slide. I cut out some of the words. Just the main idea is, if there's unmanaged areas in the middle of 2017, that basin, the whole basin, is eligible for probation. So when we do probation, that probationary designation, we're calling a basin probationary. And so for all of these triggers, that is true. But the next trigger is coming up in 2020, and that's either if there's no plan or if the Department of Water Resources finds that plan inadequate. So they'll be using that framework they built and the regulations they described to determine whether they think that plan will reach sustainability. And if they don't, if the department doesn't find it's good enough, and then local agencies don't fix that plan, then the state board will step in, or be able to step in. We'll have our authorities. And the other two timelines are for basins that aren't in critical overdraft. But what's important to note is these bolded conditions, the critical overdraft, long-term overdraft, or where surface waters are being depleted by groundwater pumping. Those are kind of the main criteria that drives the different timelines. But really in all of them, it's did you adopt a plan, and are these conditions occurring? But it's important to note that these triggers, once you get your plan in place, it's up to the department. So the Department of Water Resources, the state board can't step in on its own accord. We have to wait for the department to say, yeah, there's a problem here. And so I think that's worth noting in the distinction of the roles, and to help kind of separate the powers a little bit so that we can't, be a little capricious. We have to make sure that there's definite evidence determined by the department that there's a problem locally. Which drills into the final point. there at the bottom is all of these triggers are driven by difficulties and challenges at the local level, but we can't step in until there's a failure at the local level. So moving through this kind of state backstop or state intervention, the first step, and a big one, is reporting. So in unmanaged areas and basins that we call probationary, you will be submitting individual well data to the state water board, and we will be collecting that data. So breaking that down a bit, as I described earlier, is we're being a data manager. Every well will have to submit its location, the volumes pumped on a monthly basis, where they're using that water, and what they're using that water for. So the purpose of use, sort of similar to water rights reporting, but it will be on a well-by-well basis. It's also important to note that if we do move forward with a probationary designation, we can add additional requirements for reporting. So if we feel that there's additional data that the basin needs to develop a good plan, we'll require the pumpers to collect that data or report that data to the state board. And what's also interesting is when we do what's called the probationary designation, we can impose a requirement to add meters to the wells. And so that won't be automatic with unmanaged areas, but if we do start moving through this progression and we call it probationary, we'll have the authority to require metering, and then likely we'll be developing a metering inspection program, metering calibration, things like that. What we're working on right now is kind of building up our data systems to make sure that these requirements are enforceable. So we're building a reporting database where users will have to log in to provide their data. This database will be public and transparent, so as the data gets submitted up to us, those pumping volumes and those well locations will be readily available on our website for the general public and other interested parties in the basin. Because essentially at the end of the day, this data is a resource for management, and we're collecting it on behalf of locals so that they can use it when we hand management back. And so moving forward, the next important note is fees. And so each of these extraction reports will include a fee. And those extraction reports will cover our program costs. So the state isn't paying for state intervention. The pumpers are paying and will be recovering our costs. So all of the activities that we go through will need to be recovered by these fees. And so we're working on a fee schedule right now, kind of figuring out all the different activities we would do during state intervention. Potentially all of the facilitation we'd need, the investigations, the inspections on properties, make sure that people aren't misreporting the numbers. And then we'll be doing hearings in front of our board. All of those costs need to be recovered, and they will be recovered through this fee schedule that we're developing. And so the timeline for that is we're going to have the database and the fee schedule ready by the middle of next year so that they can both come online at the same time. Moving on, the next is this probationary step I mentioned. And this is an opportunity for locals to fix issues. So it kind of varies by trigger, but if there's no GSA or there's no plan, locals will have 180 days to fix those issues. So either get a GSA in place or get a plan in place. And so there's kind of this grace period built in before the State Water Board can move forward with the process. But also during this time, we'll be collecting the data we need, because that data will be important to the plan we develop. And then finally, this last step is this interim plan. And this is kind of the end stage of state intervention. And it's where we identify what's wrong in the basin. So long-term overdraft is our main target. And we will develop corrective actions that we see fit to fix that long-term overdraft. And this is kind of what we can think of as the basin manager role. And so SIGMA kind of spells out what has to be in that plan. We have to identify the actions to correct long-term overdraft. Those actions are most likely going to be pumping cutbacks. We have to identify a schedule, so when those actions have to take place. And then we have to identify the monitoring to verify that action is working. And so that's a kind of very vague way of what the statute gave us. But they didn't give us a lot of other authorities. They kind of gave us really one tool, and we're allowed to put restrictions on pumping. And so it's a clear authority, and we're able to move on it once we get to this stage. and we'll be able to verify it through these metering requirements that we impose. But also that we will be recovering the costs of any studies needed to determine what the long-term overdraft was, and then also any studies to verify that people are actually abiding by the restrictions we put in place. It's also very important to note that state intervention is temporary. This interim plan is not meant to be a final solution. It's not really meant to be an elegant solution. As Dave mentioned, we're not probably the best suited to manage your basin for you, where you don't have all of that local expertise. We have a few kind of core tools at our disposal, and we're going to use those. We can't get as creative. And so while there may be a very nice solution that local agencies can develop that is less draconian or less severe, we're not going to have the resources to figure that out. And so we're going to do what we know how to do, and that's unfortunately fairly simple, and that's pumping cutbacks until the overdraft is remedied. Once the interim plan is in place, local agencies or the basin at large must petition the board to remove that interim plan. And so that's where you will have to bring evidence to us saying, look, here's our solution, here's how it's going to fix the issues. We don't need the interim plan anymore. And then the board will make that decision. So that could be a GSP of your own, or it could even be an adjudication action. But it's important to note that it's not just that you do those things. The board has to review it and then determine whether that plan you put in place is up to par. And I wanted to touch on, just in kind of a final thought, is this note on adjudications, because I think people are saying if they're in the interim plan phase, why not just go to adjudication? It may get you out of the state intervention role. And I wanted to point out that adjudications and this kind of proving up of the rights is not a way to get out of the SGMA process. And the first important point is that SGMA prevents the rush to the pump house. So any pumping that happens between when SGMA came in place, January 1st, 2015, and when you get your GSP adopted, can't be used to prove up your right. And I think that's an important note. Also important that this whole adjudication process was reformed last year by a couple of bills. They made some good changes to streamline things, but also what they did was they ensured that it's consistent with SGMA. And so there isn't a kind of a way out through adjudication anymore. And it's also important to note that the judge will review the adjudication to make sure it's consistent with SGMA. It may refer to that adjudication over to the department, and the department will review it the same way they'd review a groundwater sustainability plan. And also similar to state intervention, a court may now issue a preliminary injunction cutting back on pumping until the adjudication finishes. So it's not like everyone could just keep pumping until the usually lengthy process of the adjudication is finished. The court may kind of put something in place on a temporary basis, similar to an interim plan, to hold things in place until the adjudication can be finalized. So kind of some finishing thoughts on these main topics, main steps and actions that we'll be taking, is that I want to drill home that intervention only occurs when locals fails. As Dave said, the board, as Eric said, the board really doesn't want to step in. We're not we're not kind of itching at the trigger. We will when we have to, but we'll only step in where it's appropriate and where it's necessary, but we are very ready to step in where it's necessary. There's many local opportunities to fix these issues, or what triggered state intervention. And so once the GSA is formed, we'll say, okay, that's a trigger that you've undone. But you need to fix the problem. We'll enforce where necessary and appropriate. So there may be some places where we come in with a light touch, but there's going to be a lot of places where we don't come in with a light touch, and we're going to use the full suite of authorities we have to make sure that it's effective, and that we can remedy these pretty severe conditions that a lot of basins are experiencing. With that, that's my finishing thoughts. If there's any questions, I think we're ready to take them.
So Sam, you go to a lot of parties?
A lot of parties?
Yeah. Okay, thank you so much for your presentations. Would you all give them a hand? But you're not done. David and Eric and Sam, will you please come sit up in front? We have a mic there, and I will now take questions from the audience. Do we have to put them at the podium? They answer? They've got it. I thought he said we could. All right, okay. I'll line them all up. All right, wait a minute. Let me line you up as I call you. So you raise your hands. Okay, number 1, number 2, number 3. Looking. Number 4. We got a guy up front. 5. I would not miss Mick. Anybody else at this point? Okay, you've got the ground rules. I will tell them, yeah. All right, so please state your name and state, your organization if you have one. But yeah, please say your name first. And try to limit your comments to what has been addressed.
I'll limit my comments. My name is Bill Manofsky. I'm a member of the newly formed Indian Wells Valley Coalition. I'm also the National Vice President of Legislative Affairs for the Association of the United States Navy. To avoid confusion as to what that is, the Association of the United States Navy, we lobby Congress for the benefit of the operational Navy and the fleet. So right now I'm currently not affiliated with China Lake per se. They are a RDT and EFIS function, not on our radar. What I just gave you, my question is can you update your graph or your chart that you presented? Because I went down to the water district and I acquired the well sounding data for the 11 deep wells that we draw our water from. And your graph or your picture does not show the 3 wells that are coming back up. Wells 8, 9, and 13, particularly well number 8, which is really not currently a production well. It's capped off, but it's come up 48 feet. Wells 17 and 30 have come up. Their current decline is 2.4 inches and 1.3 inches respectively. So when you're redoing your numbers, can you please take this into consideration, because I think it got overlooked as much as the farmer's letter did not get included into the Todd report. Okay. And then to answer your question, when you came here last, offline we discussed, you made the suggestion that I try to look for money for the Navy to drill deep exploratory wells, and I'm currently in the process of doing that. It's just taken very slow with this Congress. Thank you.
Okay, so David, would you?
Yeah.
I think you have to go to the podium in order to get on the TV. Is that okay? Is that true, Peggy? You don't know. Somebody back there? Person? There he comes. Does he have to, you can do it right there. Oh, good.
Okay, let me first try to answer the point on the wells. Absolutely, we're always going to be updating wells. In fact, we always do that. That's part of the job. You need to do that. However, first of all, don't get misled, though. I look at this as like 5 years of data, so you got to be careful. We're looking decades, and so
yeah, that's 10 years of data. I was only given that, so just
yeah. So my point being is we're looking at dozens of wells and decades of data, and so we got to be careful. We're looking at the big picture, and that's what we need to continue to do, and that's what we're going to encourage folks to do: is look at the big picture. I've got a lot of experience. I'm actually a geotechnical engineer. I can show you a well 10 feet apart, and they're doing completely different things. So we have to look at the big picture when we're doing that kind of thing. The information that we have is pretty conclusive, and so we'll absolutely update this information. We're going to continue to update that. We're in fact going to require the GSAs of the future to continue to update that and report that on an annual basis to the department to ensure that in fact we're going in the right direction.
Thank you. Who's number 2? Okay.
I'm Tom Mulvihill. I have a very short question, and it'll probably be a long answer. I was intrigued by SB 226 and AB 1390, which reformed the adjudication process. And if I was wondering if one of you could give us a brief overview as to just kind of in a nutshell what that accomplished.
Is that you, Sam? Or is it?
Yeah, I can try. So the main problem with the adjudication process in the past is that it's really lengthy. It takes usually hits a lot of hurdles, hits a lot of stops and starts, and it's due to these procedural issues associated with a court process. And so a lot of the changes that were made were to streamline that and to make sure that the things like noticing, getting everyone to the table can be done in one shot and be done correctly so that they know that they can move forward with the adjudication process. What it also did is to make it more consistent with Sigma, so it kind of aligns with the state's goals of sustainability. And so kind of how it does that is if you want to do an adjudication and have that basin not be subject to Sigma, and more importantly, subject to the State Water Board's intervention, you have to make sure that the adjudication is for the whole basin. And so it kind of sets these definitions of how big of an adjudication is big enough to be considered out-of-state intervention. And so I think you'd have to check the numbers, but I think it's about 75% of the pumpers have to be included. So you can't just kind of include, the three major pumpers. What's also changed is that a lot of times what happens in an adjudication is you come to some stipulated agreement where all the parties say, all right, this is a solution we can all come and agree on. Now that stipulated agreement, stipulated judgment, can get referred to the Department of Water Resources, and the Department of Water Resources will say, yeah, this is good enough for Sigma, state intervention doesn't apply anymore. And so that's kind of, I think, a key change that makes sure that the adjudication process is consistent with this bigger statewide goal of sustainability.
Thank you. Eric?
Just really quickly to add, the other kind of thing I think is worth noting is that the adjudication process doesn't get you out of Sigma. So you can start an adjudication, but you still have to do the Sigma process as well until you get to the point that Sam mentioned where you maybe take the adjudication to the court or refer it to DWR and kind of use that as your Sigma plan. But if it doesn't work as a separate process, you still have to do Sigma as well.
Thanks. Who's number 3?
I'm Don Decker. In looking at the regulations and the actual original Sigma legislation, it appears that there's a strong encouragement for the eligible local agencies to form a GSA using MOA or JPA approaches. That may well be an appropriate method for many basins, but when you have a basin like this basin that has such a range, a disparate, I'll say, range of interests, the JPA approach results in a very unequal representation. As a matter of fact, what's being talked about right now, the majority of the water here would be pumped by private individuals or corporations who are not represented on the board at all. And it leaves an issue which is a representation issue that many of us believe requires a different approach, a special district or perhaps a general act district, rather than the more expeditious JPA approach. I wondered if any of you had a comment that you would, or a clarification to what I just offered to you.
I'm going to answer it, and if I'm off track on understanding your question, correct me. So the Sigma was actually created, and a key component is that it's got to be a public local agency that has land use or water use. And the key term for your question, I think, is public. And so SIGMA is created to require the public agency to be the GSA, and that's clear in the law. So it specifically did not allow a private organization to be a groundwater sustainability agency. And there's particular reasons for that, and that is that you want the public to actually be the one in charge of the basin. Now, with that being said, then it's up to the GSA, the public local agencies, to figure out the best way to actually set up a governance structure that's going to work with the various components and the various situation. And there's complete and total flexibility to do that. And so I think the legislation perfectly recognized the fact that there is so many different ways you can actually do this. There's so many different ways to actually have a governance structure. It's really given the local agencies the flexibility to figure out what's the best for their community.
Okay, thank you. Eric?
One other thing worth noting, special act districts or general act districts, they're not any easier, necessarily on their own. They're still very difficult. I think a good example is what happened over in Paso Robles that was just voting for their own water district. It was a special act district, and they had a vote for formation of the district and a property or Prop 218 vote, and both failed about a 78 to 22% no versus yes margin. So, and that was after about 2 years worth of work, taking it to the public, going through the LAFCO process. It's very difficult, but it is an option. I mean, I think SIGMA does recognize that there's a lot of different ways that you can go about it, but a special act district doesn't necessarily any easier than any other way.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Don.
Yes, Michael Neal. I have two questions. One, the first one's for Mr. Gutierrez. When he's talking about the undesirable results in the basin, and I noted those as two qualities, such as lowering of the water table, or not having enough recharge. And you mentioned, and I think these were maybe they're purposely not well defined, but I'm curious as to if there is a decent definition of, you're talking about significant and unreasonable results.
That's a great question. So the statute, the law was actually somewhat vague on what's significant and unreasonable. And I think the reason why it was set that way is, again, what's significant and unreasonable in one particular basin may not be significant and unreasonable in another particular basin. So we can go around the state and I could show you areas where a 50-foot drop in the water level doesn't dry anybody's well out, doesn't cause any subsidence, there's no seawater intrusion necessarily. That may not be significant and unreasonable, but we could also maybe go to a different basin where we can show you 50-foot drop has significant folks, their wells dry out, or there's significant subsidence, or another 50 feet, there's another 50 feet of migration of the salt water into the land. And so it's going to be up to the local agencies to define what's significant and unreasonable, and then it's going to be up to the Department of Water Resources as a check to make sure that what they come up with is in fact significant and unreasonable.
Okay, so I understand. And the local GSA then is going to try to define that.
Yes.
But the DWR is going to look over their shoulder and say, well, we agree with those guidelines, or we don't. You may have to go back
That's
to
correct. And then there's a process to do that. And I think, the department and the regulations are putting a process to make sure there's community involvement, to make sure all folks are being heard, so that certain communities aren't left stranded and have significant and unreasonable effects to them. And then if that doesn't work, the department's put in the regulations that they're allowed to comment and come directly to the department, so that we're aware of those situations. And that's where we're kind of the backstop to make sure that the GSAs are upfront and being honest about the situation.
Okay, all right. Okay, my second one is for Mr. Bolenbry. Just at the end of your presentation, mentioned, if you go into enforcement in a district, you use the term using a full suite of authorities to enforce apparently a pumping by corporations, individuals in the basin. I'm curious what that actually means. You're going to come in with the sheriff, cap off somebody's well, what are you going to do? Because I can guarantee you there are going to be a number of people, and old timers especially in this valley, they're going to say, no way, you're not putting a meter on my well. They'll lock their gate, so you're not coming in, you're not touching, this is my land, this is my water. You're going to see that. I guarantee you're going to see that, and you've made it plain in your presentation. You're going to meter every single well in the valley. So you got that fight first to get meters on the wells, and then guys saying, "It's my water. Don't tell me how much to use." What are you going to do about that?
It's a good question, and this is why they gave these responsibilities to the State Water Board, because this is what we have experience in doing. So we're going to use these new enforcement authorities that SGMA has given us that line up very closely with a lot of our water rights authorities. So I know it maybe hasn't occurred here, but it's been in the news of these curtailments, and inspections, and enforcements on those curtailments. So we have the authority to, at the end of the day, impose administrative civil liabilities. So we can first issue cease and desist orders, and then we can put on ACLs. And so there's these penalties associated with violations of what we require, and they're financial penalties, and they add up to $1,000 a day plus an additional charge per acre foot of water pumped. It's also worth noting that there's additional penalties if you're making stuff up. So a material misstatement to the board is also a huge financial penalty. I think those penalties ramp up in drought years, but it's these types of financial sanctions will add up quickly over time. And if it does go to that far where you're really not getting on board, we can refer it over to the Attorney General's office, and we'll see where it goes from there.
But what you're talking about is an individual water user. You're talking about $1,000 a day fine, something like that. You're not talking about going to the GSA to find them and tell them, go get this guy in line.
No, and that's what's important to note in this distinction of the roles is the GSA is the protection from the State Water Board. But if the GSA isn't doing its task, then the State Water Board works directly with the pumpers. And there's no kind of middle layer anymore, which is kind of the way SGMA intended, was that there is this middle layer, and that middle layer is effective so that the State Water Board doesn't have to become involved.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
And number 5? I think that was you, Mick.
Okay, I want to take a minute to thank all three of you guys for coming down. I really know it's not easy getting to Ridgecrest, and I know you've put a lot of time and effort into your attention to what our problems are here, and I want to thank you for coming down. I got a question, and I'm going to get to it, but I got to meander my way through. And my question is, well, my first statement is I'm confident that we can succeed. And the reason I'm confident we can succeed is because I've been attending meetings and public hearings and town halls, and we've been doing this for almost a year and a half, 2 years now. And I've seen people who disagree vehemently on issues, but all of them consistently demonstrate the desire for success. It's not like we have people here that are resisting success. They want this to succeed. They want to create a sustainment plan, and they want to win. I can't say that across Kern County, but I can tell you that's a fact here. One of the problems we have, which is probably similar to a lot of problems across your sphere of influence, is building community support for what we're trying to do. We have probably a lot like many other communities. We have a sphere of thought. We have a spectrum this wide of people who have different opinions as to what SGMA is, what it means, and how we're going to respond to it. We have people on one side of the spectrum that say, we got no water, we're going to run dry tomorrow, and they pull disparate pieces of information and data pieces together and throw it in front to present an argument as to why there's an extreme emergency to what we're doing. They're not all wrong. I mean, they have some reasonable data they pull out and show you, and you look and say, yeah, that stuff's right. On the other end of the sphere, we have people who say, we have tons of water. We have all kinds of water. All we got to do is move wells around, shift them around, feed and build some type of system, a better system that we got, or dig our wells deeper because nobody knows where the bottom is, and we got tons of water. They're kind of right. I mean, they make sense in what they're saying. They're pulling pieces of information. It makes sense, but neither side completes the argument and details all the facts as best we can. And most conveniently, they forget to list pieces of information that would paint the complete picture. So building community support is our job as community leaders, and and that's why I'm saying that I have some confidence in what we're doing. So one of the things that's important to understand is that I think it's important to build this community support is that September 18th, 2014 was the day that SGMA was passed into law by the state legislature. I remember that because it was a Tuesday. And I remember that also because I was sitting at the dais down at Kern County in the afternoon session where my chief of staff comes down, whispers in my ear and says, they passed SGMA. SGMA was important to me. We had been monitoring it very carefully because we were also engaged in other activities here that just happened to coincide with the efforts of SGMA. So we didn't know SGMA was going to happen, but we initiated strategies to figure out what we want to do as a community. So I'll be getting there quick, I promise.
That's okay. What I'm going to do is when everybody gets up here from the GSA agencies to make their speech, you've already given yours, so you're
right. Okay, that's fantastic. That's fantastic. But I'll get to my question. Because I need feedback from you guys.
That's okay.
So it happened. And I remember it because we were watching it very carefully, and we took action to continue doing what we were doing at the present time to manage our land use practices here in the Valley. We did. So at the same time SGMA was going in this direction, a parallel effort was going on by Kern County, and many people were confused, thinking that they were one and the same or they were related, and I want you to talk about how those things are related, if they are at all. So it was a land use plan. It was a horrible experience. I hated it. Half the people in this room hated it. I don't think anybody liked it. It did a lot of good for the community, but it was tough. It was difficult. But the Indian Wells Valley got it done. We did it, and it wasn't easy. But we did it because we recognized the value, our core values, who we are, and we managed to push it through. My question to you is this. Seeing that we've passed difficult legislation in Kern County, seeing that we've made progress, and you're going to hear about more progress tonight that the GSA eligible agencies have done, seeing that this county has a finite set of problems and a population that is eager to solve the problems for the most part, my question is this. Are you as confident as I am that we can succeed? Building in your context from where you sit, are you confident that we can, as confident as I am, that we can succeed? Thanks a lot.
So I had the pleasure of coming back here in October, and actually that was very encouraging. I've seen some champions around the table trying to address the problem, and I do see actually a finite, you could actually define your problem in this basin. It's not extremely complex. It's fairly simple compared to some of the other extremely complex basins from a technical standpoint. So I'm very encouraged. I absolutely think you guys can succeed if you continue to go into the right direction. You're going to have some tremendous difficult decisions to make, and there's going to be a lot of unpopular folks, I'm sure, making those decisions. But you got to kind of keep moving through it. We want you to succeed. We're there to help you. We're going to try to provide as much assistance as we possibly can, both financial and technical assistance. So I absolutely see you can succeed if you're willing to make some of those tough decisions that I think you're going to be able to have to make in the near future. So that's why we're here, is because we think you can succeed, and we're here to kind of help you get over the goal line. So yeah, absolutely you can succeed. Tell us what you need from us, and we're going to try to provide it from the department's standpoint.
One last question. What role did Kern County play, if any, in the labeling of this basin as a critically overdrafted basin?
I don't think you guys had anything to do with that. I mean, it's one of your initial questions was, what did you guys have to do with Sigma? Was it coincidental or not? I guess it was, because I didn't even know you guys were doing what you were doing while Sigma was going along. So the critical conditions of overdraft are completely, it's a technical question, and it's the answers by our technical folks in the Department of Water Resources. Tim Ross was the lead in figuring out whether this basin's in critical condition of overdraft. Again, I look at the data. It was really briefed to me, so I have my staff actually doing the work, and then they brief me. And this was one of the more simpler ones. I mean, you look at over the decades, you look at the direction of the water levels. There's really no reason to question him on that. And so we did give you a chance to argue it. You being the community, the local agencies. There was no information that anybody provided to us that would have changed our minds or did change our minds. So that's why we moved forward. So you did have the opportunity to change our mind. You didn't. But I think that would have been an uphill battle because I think the information's pretty clear on this particular basin. And again, it kind of really doesn't matter. Really what matters is you got to do a plan. Do you got to do a plan by 2020 or 2022? Either way, you got to do a plan. So we might as well start attacking the problem sooner rather than later.
Thanks, David. All right, what I'd like to do now, well, first let me ask you, would your presentations be available for us to put up on our website?
Yep.
Yeah?
I think you have them on your desktop.
Okay.
You could do whatever you want with them.
Alan, can that? Okay. Okay, so that should happen, and that would mean that all of you would have the opportunity to peruse them again on the web, and if you have to get more into it. Okay, I'd like the GSA eligible agency representatives to come up and sit along with them, and please somebody from the Navy, and also Robert from the BLM, because you're associate members. No, you guys stay. You guys stay. It's all right. There's enough. There's only 5 of them. Actually, there's 7. There should be exactly enough. I think we counted. All right. Yeah, there we go. Okay. Oh, look, did we do this perfectly? All right. The first thing we're just doing for housekeeping is approving the minutes. I know we've been criticized. The group has been criticized because the minutes, and they aren't minutes, by the way. What they are really are, we just make summary notes, and in order to make them transparent, we really write down many of the comments that are said. It doesn't mean that these comments are decisions. It just means that these were topics that were spoken in the meeting. We want to be transparent, and so therefore anything that's said and talked about, we report. You might not agree with everything that's said. They don't. They go back and forth, and all of this is included in the meeting notes. If anything is decided by basically consensus, which is how we've been operating, it's written down as decided by consensus or everybody agreed. So please think about that when you do read these notes. The other criticism was that they hadn't been put up on the web for like a month. And at first that happened. We weren't coordinated enough. But now the April 7th meeting notes are on the web. That was just last week. So we are making them up, we're getting them done faster, and they're up there for your perusal. So we put the notes up draft for April 7th. Were there any problems with that? You all have read over the agencies, representatives have read them over. Were there any additions or corrections that need to be done? Okay, then they're approved, and what's on the web is now the final April 7th meeting notes. Okay, so really what I want to do is just let everyone kind of talk about, like what Mick just did, talk about what's been, not quite that long,
I'm sorry.
but just to kind of give a little bit of what your thoughts are on what has been going on. There's been a lot that's happened. I mean, really, when you think about it, I came down the first time with David for the October 23rd meeting. That was my introduction. And I mean, a lot has happened in the past 5 or 6 months. This group has been meeting like every couple of weeks. And, the meeting that's supposed to take maybe an hour and a half, 2.5 hours later, they're working hard. They're very, very conscientious. So I want them to tell you what they think has been going on in the past, 6 months. So I'll start over here. Now, Matt hasn't been, with us, it's been Bob. So do you want Bob to tell what he thinks, or do you want to tell? You've got your notes. Let me tell you. He made me promise that Bob would sit near him to help him out if necessary.
Well, I have been on some of the phone calls, or many of the phone calls, and I will let Bob talk. But I'll just say that Inyo County has a really small piece of this aquifer. We don't have very many residents that live in that area, but we're in sort of a critical position in that we're uphill from this aquifer, and we have an adjudicated basin because we're a water exporter for the city of LA, and that's a complex and difficult issue at all times for an elected official like me. And so we are sensitive to water issues, and we're lucky we have a water department. And so we are trying to be engaged both to protect our citizens and, I guess, our water that's in Inyo County. I'll let Bob is shaking his head, saying that that he doesn't want to contradict anything that I've said with the real facts, and so he's just going to let me go. But okay, well, I think that's you know, there are issues that we're really concerned about, and I feel well represented as we're working through the forming the GSA.
Hi. You want to say who you are?
Sorry, that was my fault.
Well, I had introduced myself before. My name's Matt Kingsley, and I'm the 5th District Supervisor from Inyo County. And the 5th District is the district that has Pearsonville and in it, as well as Trona, part of Trona, and what's that? Mount Whitney and Death Valley, yeah.
Peggy Breeden, City of Ridgecrest. The City of Ridgecrest has not voted on anything except that the JPA is the method in which we agreed to follow along with this. We have not taken any positions on anything else, so whatever I say, I am speaking for me and what was discussed. Our city has not taken a position. I'm going to ask Keith if he will update a little bit of this, but one of the things that's most important in my mind is not whether we're an open or closed basin, not whether we are this or that. What matters is the depth to water is dropping. If that's the case, we are in a position where we have an opportunity to make changes and to make it happen. And there is nobody who knows this valley better than we do. I do not want somebody who doesn't have to live with the results of the decision to make those decisions. And so consequently, I appreciate what you all are doing here and what you've brought to us, but we make the decisions because we must live with them. And Keith, would you like to say something, please? Keith always does.
Yeah, I never turn down the opportunity at the microphone. I'm Keith Lemieux. I'm the city attorney, and I guess I should talk a little bit about where we are in terms of process. The city council at a prior meeting authorized me to be the negotiator for the city for purposes of developing a joint powers agreement. This is the governing document to form a joint powers. And one of the things that they charged me with is a desire to make everything as transparent as possible. And that's not always easy when you're negotiating a contract. So we've had some meetings trying to pull that all together. But the one thing I want to let everybody know is that one of the things that we're all trying to do, and I've been directed to do, is try to make as few decisions as possible without public input, which means we're trying to put the bare minimum necessary into the JPA to get the JPA up and running so that the JPA can have public meetings like this one and take comments from the public on all of the important issues to the public. So I know there's been some talk percolating around about, well, how are we going to get the public involved, who sits on committees, what do the committees look like? And I want you to understand that that's something that we're trying to get in front of the public as soon as we can once the JPA is formed and up and running.
moderator starts, that this is going to go over, and I really just need your permission to maybe give us 15 to 20 minutes to go over. You all okay with that?
Those of you who are wondering what was happening with the power, there are power lines down on Down Street, and public safety officers and Edison have gone over there. So we are on auxiliary power right now.
I guess it's good that they have generators. I'm Peter Brown in the Indian Wells Valley Water District. I want to ditto the city's remarks. We're really close, really. We're just a hair's breadth away of forming the JPA. And it is going to be a really basic administrative function. And the whole point of that is so once we form the JPA, then we'll form the GSA, and then we'll form the GSP. Yeah, I love to do that. Anyways, the whole point of it is we want public participation. So our last big discussion was the voting. How does the JPA people vote and things like that? So I think we're really, maybe one meeting away. And then the way we work, the water district, the way the city, everybody else works, is we have to go back and talk to our boards. And we have to get a consensus of our boards. Now, maybe we don't all agree. That's kind of classic for boards. And if we're really good at describing what we're doing, you'll get a unanimous vote. Sometimes you won't. The point is that it's the board that decides on how we proceed from here, just like Peggy said. I just wanted to respond to the data point question. There's 80 wells that we monitor in the valley or more? 280. Who said that? Oh, okay. Well, anyway, there's a lot of wells. I just want to make a remark about the information. That was actually the primary well field for the water district forever. And everybody was pumping from the base, Searles Valley, the water district, 3 major wells. When the groundwater management steering committee was formed, we all decided it would be a great thing to spread out the pumping and get rid of that massive pumping depression. So the data there is basically a recovery from a pump depression. So it's worth noting, and it's worth noting that the data points, like Dave said, we're using all the data points, and that's how you have to come up with an equation. So we welcome input, whatever you guys want. I mean, in the end, the water district will end up paying our fair share. So there's no way we're going to levy a pump tax or whatever the equation's going to be. We'll have to pay exactly the same thing. So it's to our best interest to do the right thing and the most conservative thing. And so I don't know if that's reassuring or not, but we have to play in the same pool, the same game, spend the same money per unit, however that works out. So again, there's not going to be something different. Everybody's in the same boat. I guess that's a good word for a boat. Water. Yeah. Anyways, I do want to thank you guys for coming, and it was very clear. Your information was clear, and I really enjoyed it the second time. So thank you. And these guys, I like the word backstop. It's much better than hammer. So, anyways.
So, Mick, you can have one more chance, but not a long, real quick. Okay.
15 seconds. The county has spent how much money, Phil? And do we know, Alan? We've spent $500,000 to this point, getting from where we were to where we are now. That's got to stop.
Robert Lovingood, 1st District, San Bernardino. Obviously impacted with Searles Valley and Trona. What we're wanting to see, that we come out with a sustainable plan. It's really for all the folks, when I say that, all the users that are participating. And it's something that we all agree on. We'll be proactively involved. And we know that Searles Valley and the residents there have a big impact on this community in Ridgecrest. Mick came down probably 6 months ago, maybe a little bit longer. We had our first meeting and really started becoming involved. I was able to send Alan an email request if we're going to have meetings. I prefer them at 6 in the morning versus 5 in the evening on a Friday, but I appreciate being here. And I say that actually Bob, who's been mostly involved, he'll speak in a moment, has the longest drive home, about 3.5 hours tonight. But we will be here and we'll be a part of this, and we look forward to it. So thanks for having us out.
Thank you, Supervisor. Yeah, I've been representing the county in these discussions on, sorry? I'm sorry, he said my name, so I apologize. My name is Bob Page. I work in the administrative office for the county of San Bernardino, doing special projects. Water policy is one of those. And I've been involved in these meetings since December, working with the other parties to try to come to some resolution on how we all work together for the betterment of the whole basin. And that's pretty much what my goal is how do we come together cooperatively to work together for everybody. Thank you.
I'm Robert Pavelek, Chief of Resources for the Bureau of Land Management. We manage 1.9 million acres of public land. We are not the landowner, you are, but we manage for a multitude of uses, including recreation and grazing and hydrologic functions, which is why I am here. And we are an associate member, not a voting member. Just wanted to make that clear. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Commander Jared Markley. I'm the Environmental Counsel at Navy Region Southwest. Here on behalf of Captain Wiley, who's here as well, the CEO of the base. Obviously, we're interested in what happens to the water in this basin. The Naval Air Weapons Station China Lake covers a lot of acreage over the basin, and we employ a lot of people who live in this community and use the water as well. Our goal, like everybody else here, is to work cooperatively to achieve a sustainable groundwater supply to meet the current and future mission needs out at Naval Air Station China Lake, as well as to make sure the water's equitably shared out in the basin, because a lot of the folks here in the valley are our employees, they're our people, and so we want to make sure that they have the water that they need. For us, this is the continuation of decades of cooperative work that we've been doing with these good folks in terms of studying the basin and trying cooperatively to understand how best to develop, how best to model, and how best to conserve the water in this basin. So we're proud to be part of continuing that process and getting to a resolution that works for everybody. We plan to actively participate. We're also associate members, non-voting. We're a federal agency, so we can't be a full member of this local organization. But we plan to continue doing what we've done for years, which is providing in-kind and technical support and helping out as much as we can to get to the right answer. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to let Phil Hall just explain a little. Actually, Keith started out and gave a good explanation of what's been happening as far as our JPA, but I'll just let Phil continue if that's okay, because Phil is the one that has done all the drafts. We keep giving him changes, and he has to keep making them. So,
as you've all heard, the JPA is moving forward. Really, we're at policy questions, and we were kind of at that point last time we met up here, and you've seen a JPA that's got a draft date of, I think, February 2nd on the front. From then, the attorneys have got together and kind of figured out some of the boilerplate attorney stuff in there, and those are pretty well buttoned up. But really, it's down to policy questions, which are voting and leaving the JPA, initial startup costs, but those are all policy choices. They're not attorney choices, so it's really now in the hands of the policy people. One comment I did want to make, I guess Meadowbrook has sent out a letter with a comment about stepping away from the GSP concept committee, which has been talked about at times. That's not really the case. In the letter, they mentioned the county said, well, let's stop talking about the JPA, the committee, and until we get the JPA up. I made that suggestion first, and then it was kind of accepted, and the sole purpose for that was when you have a JPA, the board will be a Brown Act committee board, and as it develops what the committees look like, that'll be done in the open light, not on phone calls. So that was the idea, and that seems to be where we're going.
I'll click that one too for the rest. Okay, and now I think, Tim, you want to talk about, that's where we are now with next steps? We'll do the questions after that. Okay. So Tim is going to, this is Tim Parker, our consultant, and he's going to talk to you a little bit about milestones and timeline.
Right. Well, you've heard the progress we've made And, you know, you may have seen or heard, or we may have showed you a milestone and schedule at the previous meeting. And really, we originally thought we'd have this pretty well wrapped up in June. And as you can tell, we're talking through these policy questions. And the way I look at it, until the JPA is signed, that's when we know the date that we'll be complete with it. But we think we're really close. I think a lot of people will think we're really close. And so sometime in the next month or two, we're hoping to have that wrapped up. But like I said, until it's signed, we won't know it. It won't be done. Once it is signed, then we will, within 30 days, submit it, and we'll have a public meeting, a public hearing to another meeting to share with the public what the JPA is and open it for comment. That'll be noticed under government code 2 weeks in advance, and then there'll be 30 days after that it'll be submitted. So we'll have another meeting and we'll get your input, and then there'll be a decision by this group to form that GSA after that public hearing. And so then 30 days after that, it gets submitted to DWR. Within 30 days, I think it's 15 days. Within 15 days, you have to have it posted on the website. And then if there aren't any overlapping basins, as David mentioned before, which there shouldn't be any overlapping GSAs, since all the GSA eligible agencies are part of it, then the GSA would be considered formed in 90 days. And so that's kind of the schedule for when this would be started. And so I think I'll end there with that. Now, I did want to do a little update on some of the things going on in the basin. Or do you want to open it for questions now?
Probably when we do this, just if you tell what's going on now quickly.
Yeah, I just wanted to give you...
We'll end with the questions, for sure.
Yeah, I just wanted to give you a little bit of information. You know about the Cooperative Groundwater Management Group that's been ongoing for a while, and they have a technical advisory committee. And that continues to be meeting and coordinating activities. And some of the things that we're looking at there is continuing to look at the monitoring situation in the site with the various agencies doing monitoring. And then also we're prioritizing a list of projects we developed, and we'll be talking about that in about a week. Then there's a groundwater group that is put together funding for a brackish water study. And so some things are happening on that. And I wanted to see if Mike would want to just say a few words about the pilot project that's ongoing. The first step of this has been, stand up. And the first step of this brackish water study, which includes some surface geophysics across a basin to get a better conceptual model, to better understand the basin, is to do a pilot project. So, Mike, you want to fill us in on what's going on there?
Yeah, Tim introduced a Stanford University researcher to us in October of 2015. He came out and they did some TDMs, which is a total time domain electromagnetic survey on 3 sites, and they also did a nuclear magnetic resonance survey, whatever that means, right? So what they've done is two types of geophysical surveys at areas where the Navy has drilled using the CBs, where the Navy has drilled wells in a freshwater area, kind of in a freshwater low-quality water interface, and then over in the brackish. So we've done those 3 areas in October. The results were mixed. We had good results where we had no interference, no noise, no electrical lines, buried cables, whatever, which makes sense. So they were mixed. So what we're doing now is a downhole. The NMR was a surface NMR. What we're doing this time, they're in the valley right now, is a downhole NMR, which is typically done in the oil fields. But this Clara Vista Clara, has a tool that'll fit down, a slim tool that'll fit down a drinking water well or a monitoring well.
We started yesterday, so I have no results. I hope to have something to talk to next Thursday at our groundwater meeting. But they're going to do 5 wells. We started one yesterday yesterday about noon. They've probably finished that by now, moving to the second site. We'll work through Monday. And as a pilot study, kind of working toward that brackish water study that the Navy and partners are doing. So I hope that wasn't too windy.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. I would just want to point out that nuclear magnetic resonance, it doesn't mean that there's anything nuclear going down into the water. All it is, it's a big magnet that spins hydrogen. Water is made up of hydrogen and oxygen, so it spins the hydrogen in the aquifer, and then you measure how long it takes, what the relaxation curve is of the hydrogen. That gives you an estimate of porosity and permeability. So it's great information you get out of this tool to understand not only how much water we have in the basin, but also how much water we can get out of the basin. So anyway, I think I'm really excited about this because it really gives us more information on the basin. And the primary objective of this brackish water study is to get a good understanding of brackish water resources for treatment, and that may meet some of our future water supply demands. And there's a lot of potential for that. Then Kern County, I just wanted to touch base on the recharge study, and it was mentioned that we got actually Kern County got $500,000, 250s coming over here under the Stress Counties grant application. And so there's a recharge study that's planned as just a portion of that the U.S. Geological Survey is going to do. And it's really going to take precipitation data, historic precipitation data, and climate data modeling precipitation data, and use a GIS approach taking into account the soils, the geology, the slope, the stream, the little bit of stream flow we get here, intermittent stream flow, to estimate how much water is coming into the basin. This will be a much better approach. It's been used all over the state. And so that's one of the big questions we have is how much water is actually getting into our basin. So we hope to get that going this summer. I'm not sure what the status of the grant application, the application's in, but the contracting, I don't think that's started yet, but it'll take a couple of months, and then we hope to get that going. And by the way, at the TAC meeting, or the Cooperative Groundwater Group meeting next week, we hope to have the USGS giving a WebEx on that. So they'll do a PowerPoint to provide that to us. And I just want to say, with this new information coming in from the brackish water study and the recharge study, that's going to give us a better conceptual model of the aquifer system. And the next step for that will then be we're going to need to think about either revising the groundwater flow model or getting a new flow model. And that is going to be a very important tool for us to do the planning, to develop the groundwater sustainability plan and look at different management scenarios. What kind of things can we do to become sustainable under the new law? And then finally, want to just add that the city's working on a wastewater treatment plant, on updating that or a new plant. And I don't know if Peggy wants to say anything about that, but that's just another thing going on. I thought it would be useful to provide information to you all on all the things going on in the basin, that we are trying to really move things along. Okay, so, thanks.
Okay, great. Thanks, Tim. Okay, so now we're going to open it up, and I said we'd take about 10, 15 minutes, so let me get a queue going.
Do you want me to help on this?
Well, they can go to the podium.
Okay.
Yeah. Or, well, you're all in front. No, yeah, you can help me on this. Okay. 1, 2, 3, 4, and I'm not going to take too many. 5. Anybody else? Because it is late. Wait, I'm backwards.
Judy.
Judy? 6. Okay, let's start.
Ken, I'm Bill Manofsky. I've been an engineer for 30 years. In fact, if you go to the China Lake Museum and look at the Tomahawk display, there's 3 long drawings on the bottom. I did the middle one. I was on the team that designed the Tomahawk cruise missile. So I'm not new to engineering studies. When I have a question. can you please do the same studies on well 36? Please know about well 36. It's capped off. There's no instrumentation in it. It was a well that was traded for land up along Brown Road. That well goes down to 1,000 feet. It's a 36-inch casing. It's new, and when it was pumped, the pump was placed at 700 feet, and it drew 4,000 gallons per minute and only drew down 71 feet, which is significant. So to properly do your study, what we need is a properly zoned well or set of wells down deep. And the reason why I say that is I drew this chart from the water district data. And what I did was I plotted the altitude of the different well fields, and then I plotted the groundwater level, the static water level, and I was surprised they lined up. Okay, so what I think is going on here is all of the red dots on your chart reflect shallow wells that go down to the static water level. In the lower well fields, southwest well fields, about 400 feet. Buttermilk Acres is about 300 feet. And closer to town, it's about 200 feet. And so there might be a phenomenon where in these shallow wells, there's a combination of the inverted cone drawdown and the water table going down, whereas the deeper wells may not be that effect because the deeper wells are showing a shallower drawdown. So we may have water down deep based on the data from well 36.
So would you like, what would your question be,
Can you
Bill?
please consider funding couple wells down to at least 1,000 feet that are properly zoned with barriers of concrete to where we can drop pumps down to the different levels, inflate a collar, and do a draw from the different depths to see actually where the water's coming from. And also do testing for TDS. Because well 36 showed Title 22 clean water all the way down below 1,000 ppm.
Okay, I think, did you want to answer that, David, or you want to talk offline with him? Yeah. You talk offline with him? Thanks, Bill. Number 2? Oh, you've got it, okay.
Tom Wicknick. I got a which came first, chicken or the egg question. You're forming a JPA, and what I hear is that you're very close to having an agreement for the JPA. But yet, I think every one of these elected representatives have to go back to their body to approve the JPA. Okay? So my question is that the JPA, is that going to become presented to each one of these public agencies at a public meeting before they come back to the GSA for the acceptance of the JPA? Is that the procedure?
Okay.
Can we talk at the same time?
Yes.
Yeah, it has to be that way because we have to vet everything that all the decisions we make as a single person through our board. That's why we have to have a consensus. That's all done in public. So yeah, it goes. The JPA is formed. That's what we're doing right now. We're finalizing what we can all possibly agree to, which has really been interesting. But I think we're really close. Once we have a draft document that we all say, this looks really good, we'll take it to our boards. Our boards will have a long discussion or a short one. And then if every agency agrees to it, then we're done. If there's an issue, then we'll talk about it some more. We try to foresee issues, but you just never know. So yes, process works.
Okay, so the answer is that since it sounds like we're close, pretty soon we should be seeing things at each one of our water board meetings and the city council meeting and the county supervisor meetings as far as what there is. Thank you.
Is this eligible for closed session or is this an open session item? Okay. The answer is yes from the Kern County.
Okay, thanks, Phil. Okay.
Hi, good evening. My name is Derek Hoffman. I'm with the law firm Gresham Savage, and we represent Meadowbrook Mutual Water Company. Hello, David, Eric, and Sam. Thanks for being here today. I know your time is valuable, and it's demanded all over the state, so I appreciate you being here tonight. As I said, we represent Meadowbrook Mutual Water Company, And we do have a number of concerns with the process that's been followed to form the GSA and regarding the current joint powers agreement. Deputy County Counsel tonight, Mr. Hall, mentioned a letter, and he is correct. We did submit a letter today, and I'd like to just hand copies of that out to each of the representatives up front here today. If I'll just hand one, you can pass one down. And I have plenty of copies here as well. So I know we're running over time, so I'll just be brief and invite you to just carefully review the letter for further detail. But really, I just want to say that Meadowbrook has approached this GSA process in good faith from the beginning in an effort to work with all the public agencies. And our objective has simply been to achieve and obtain meaningful participation and representation. Now, early on, many of you may recall that Kern County strenuously objected to a GSA model that would have been similar to the Sacramento Groundwater Authority and provided board member seats for large private pumpers like Meadowbrook, Mojave Mutual, and Searles Valley Minerals. So, as a potential alternative, we tried exploring a concept of participating via the GSP Development Committee for Meadowbrook, for Mojave, for Searles Valley Minerals, and for other private pumpers. We exchanged several drafts towards that end, and we got to what we thought was about 90% of the way. So in our view, and with due respect to Supervisor Gleason here tonight, it's our view that Kern County now, as the primary driver of the GSA formation process to date, is ignoring us and is actively trying to exclude us altogether, not only from the GSA, but from the GSP Development Committee and from any other type of truly meaningful participation. And if that is not the case, we would just ask you to show us. But based on the comments from Mr. Hall tonight, it sounds like there's no intention to discuss this any further with us, if I understand those comments correctly. Now, at the last open meeting in February here in this City Hall, Mojave Mutual's attorney asked that there be an attorney working group set up to discuss the GSP Development Committee concept and to finish that process, at which point we were 90% of the way. And I do have a question at the end, I promise.
Well, but it's got to come.
It's coming. It's coming.
Derek.
Now, Kern County Council promptly rejected that offer. And so tonight, on behalf of Meadowbrook, I'm specifically asking that we arrange for that working group and begin meetings next week with counsel for the public agencies in order to finish the GSP Development Committee concept and make the necessary revisions to the Joint Powers Agreement. So my question is, will you do that? And thank you for your time. I do appreciate it.
Let me just say the GSP Development Committee concept is alive and well, and it's contained in the JPA agreement that will be coming before the public. That agreement requires that there be a GSP Development Committee and that it have active, meaningful participation in development of the GSP. Those elements are there. My city council requested that those elements be present, and that's now part of that agreement. We've decided that that's as far as we're going to take it right now until the JPA is formed. Once it's formed, these additional, filling out these details will take place, and we'll be talking to you guys about that and everybody else. But it's going to happen publicly as part of public meetings, rather than attorney meetings behind closed doors without participation of the public. And that's because the City Council has directed me, and I think the other public entities too, that we need to proceed with as much transparency as we can so that the public has input on these important issues.
Well, I won't stand up because I'm just going to be quick. Keith is exactly right. That is what the process is now. We're trying to get this out in the open. This isn't to shut Meadowbrook out. This is for Meadowbrook to be able to express its desires to a board that is the the GPA board, and express what those are in an open session, and express those in public light, not behind closed doors on phone calls where the public's not involved.
Okay, I think, Mick, quick.
Yeah, I'll be real quick. Thanks for the question. You mentioned my name, so I got to respond to it. I really do appreciate what you're saying. We have not gotten so far as to how we're going to vote on this board. So we have not been able to discuss what we're going to do with the GSP formation committee or how it's structured or how it fits, other than it's in the JPA. There's been no change from anything we've discussed ever, and we just haven't even gotten that far yet. It's effort by no effort to exclude Meadowbrook Farms nor any other entity that has been talked to previously. We just haven't gotten that far to the conversation. As far as your request to have meetings next week, the answer to that is yes. We will work with county to make sure that we at least have open interface starting next week to answer your question, so you have more visible insight into what we're doing, where we are, and why we're not where we're at that point in the conversation yet. Does that answer your question?
It does. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I appreciate that. We look forward to working with you.
Good. We are too.
Thank you.
Okay, number 4, and I'm going to ask you that the next few people, we have 3 more, I think, and I do not want a discussion, long discussion. I want a question. All right?
Okay. Let me see how to make a question out of it then.
You have to quickly.
Okay, I know how to make a question out of it. I'm getting used to this. I thank Mr. Brown for pointing out an aspect of this JPA formation that didn't quite occur to me before, and my position all along has been that the representatives on the JPA should be elected. The representation should be equitable and just and fair. And Mr. Decker and myself have both stated that that's not the case at current. The board members may want to consider the simple fact that's just been pointed out tonight, in that all the members are going to have to attend the JPA meeting, then go back to their other member agencies and get approvals, and then go back to the JPA meeting to finally make a decision. Now, that's time. Time is money. You've also got multiple attorneys that are going to be involved in this. So I want to know,
What's the
is
question?
this board going to consider changing this approach and figuring out, since we have till 2017, it's not a big hurry, how to get an actual elected, fair representation JPA board in place?
And who would you direct that to?
Anybody who cares to answer.
It's my expectation that at least the city's representative, whoever that ends up being, and by the way, we have a little chicken and the egg problem. We have the mayor up here subbing in as our representative. Obviously, there is no JPA. The city has not appointed anybody yet. But my expectation is that when that appointment is made, they will have delegated authority to make decisions on the board. That will be part of what that appointment is. They'll have to report back to the city council, but they need to be able to act at the JPA.
So they're going to have carte blanche to make decisions at the JPA meetings without going back to their member boards.
They'll have to report on what's going on, but they'll have authority to do that. They'll need to have that authority, otherwise the JPA won't be able to function.
Okay, well, that didn't answer my question, though, actually.
How's that?
My question was, is this JPA going to consider getting an actual just and equitable, fair representation of elected members, elected specifically to be on the JPA, not other agencies that then are thrown onto the JPA board?
That's not what's contemplated now. All the board members will be elected members. I think that's something we've agreed on, but they're not going to be elected separately to the board. They'll be appointed by the various boards that they come from.
Alan?
Are you speaking for them, or have they told you this, or do you know this for a fact?
You'll be happy to hear from a non-attorney.
Okay, I always am.
So one of the challenges with that is, in concept, if you could do it, if you could elect persons, they would come with no powers. And Sigma, as you remember hearing from these folks, Sigma contemplates water purveyors and people with land use authority. And so none of those elected persons, because they don't represent agencies, would be able to exercise powers necessary to do what Sigma tells them to do. Now that's my non-attorney way of explaining it, but it's a nice idea, but Sigma does really work the way it's designed, and that's to use either a JPA or an MOU to do that. But what you're suggesting sort of ties the hands of the JPA so they can't do what they need to do to comply with Sigma.
You and I should talk about this after.
Okay, yeah.
She's anxious to get me off of here.
No, I'm not anxious. I'm looking at the fact that we've gone over half an hour.
Well, I think it's going to be take a while to talk with him about that.
Okay. Judy, are you next? There's one or two more, and then we are closing.
I'm Judy Decker. I've spoken to you many times before. I will remind you that 240 years ago, our ancestors fought a war over equal representation, among other things. Two people have already spoken about this issue. And I'll give you an example. I'm not going to go over what they said. We have the elected officials, the city, the water district, San Bernardino County, Inyo County, and Kern County. The Sigma group, the JPA, is going to have to make some really hard decisions in the future that will affect all of us in our water consumption. You're going to have a vote. Suppose, I'll give you an example. Suppose the issue is a reduction of 30% for agricultural pumping along Brown Road. The city's going to vote, the water district's going to vote, the counties are going to vote, but there's only going to be one member of that board that the people along Brown Road will be able to vote for, and that is the Kern County representative. That is unequal representation. How are you going to solve that problem?
Okay, that's your question.
That is my question.
And I will give this to your supervisor.
I have every respect for every person that is sitting up here, but I see this as a really severe question, a severe problem.
We do too, Judy. We do too. And that has been one of the reasons why we haven't gotten to the GSP committee yet, any discussion there, because we're going through the iterations of trying to determine fair representation. It's not an easy problem to solve. You're assuming in your question that each one of the people here get one vote.
It doesn't matter if you weigh the votes.
I'm not talking about weighting either.
You can't weigh the votes for different sections.
I'm not doing that, Judy. But what I'm saying, your question assumes everybody gets one vote, and so you'd only have one vote representing that 30% reduction in ag on the Brown Road.
I used that in my example. That's correct.
I think we're having a little more sophisticated conversations about how we're going to manage that vote. And one of the things we've thrown on the table for discussion, not agreed to yet, is everybody outlining each person's police powers and their authorities and recognizing their sovereignty with regard to their personal issues, so that we can recognize that Kern County may have is going to have better influence in the decision on that particular issue. Another issue may be a car wash on Ridgecrest Boulevard. Well, the city and the water district may need more decision power when it comes to that decision. So that's the reason why we haven't gotten as far as we have, and it's taken us time, because we're trying to cope with and develop fair representation, which is not an easy thing to do, but we're working on it.
But there's another problem, and the problem is...
Hold on. But I'll close up by saying this GSA is complying with state law. That's what we're doing.
But I understand that you are perfectly, and I have an issue with some of the things in the Sigma, but I can't do anything about that, and neither can you. But here you are, the Sigma stresses elected officials. The person on Brown Road does not have the ability to vote for the representative from the city, the representative from the water district, the representative from San Bernardino County or Inyo County.
Okay, Judy, I'm going to have to, I understand what you're doing, but we're going to have to, yeah, please.
But that needs to be solved. I have one more question, and it's for Tim Parker. This group you have stressed tonight over and over again about public involvement and public's ability to come to the meeting. I would like to know if the public can come to the TAC meeting next Thursday morning and hear the presentation by the USGS.
Actually, I think the presentation will be in the afternoon. Yeah, so that'll be open. So, and I really couldn't, because of the bylaws or the Cooperative Groundwater Management Group's bylaws. Yeah, charge. I couldn't authorize somebody to come to the TAC, but you know, moving forward, we'll have a GSA that will be working on a process.
All right, one more, and let's make it as quick as possible, please. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Paul Nugent, and thanks to the guys for coming down from the state. I'm a farmer along Brown Road, as Judy was referring to that area, and I'm a member of Mojave Mutual Water Company. And we're represented by Russell McLaughlin of Brown Scene, and we talked to Russell this morning. And the message from us is that, you know, we'd like to see this to be a collaborative process as it moves along, you know, and try to build toward a consensus and reaching a solution. And we would like to be included in the process. We do think we have things to offer, and we would just like to be included where appropriate. And really, it's not a question, more of a comment. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Does anyone have any last comments? I hope not. Is everyone okay? All right. Okay. I thank you all for coming. I was going to say at 7:30 we're done, but look at it, it's 7:29. So we did it, and thank you all. Thank you all for coming. Good clap, clap.